They were 27 teenagers, full of life, headed for one last adventure before adulthood. Then, they vanished, without a trace. No calls. No bodies. Just silence. For 22 years, the story of the class of '99 was nothing more than a terrifying urban legend. A cautionary tale whispered around campfires. That is, until a hiker stumbled upon a rusted school bus in the woods, swallowed by moss, filled with moldy yearbooks, and something else. Something no one was prepared for. June 3rd, 2021, Oregon's rogue River-Siskiyou National Forest. A seasoned hiker, off his usual trail, catches sight of a strange yellow object through the trees. Thinking it might be old equipment or a ranger outpost, he gets closer, only to find the shattered shell of a school bus, half consumed by the forest. The number on the side is almost unreadable. Inside, it looks like time just stopped. Dusty backpacks still strapped to seats. Faded Polaroids. A cassette player lying on the floor, warped by moisture. Pages from a yearbook stuck together from mold. But in the very back seat, a pile of clothing. And beneath it, what was unmistakably a human jawbone. When investigators arrived, they immediately connected the bus to one of the most chilling cold cases in Oregon history. The disappearance of Forest Grove High School senior class of 1999, during their graduation trip. But the deeper they looked, the more impossible it all became. There was no record of the bus ever being rented. No trail cameras had picked up its entry. No road nearby. And inside, personal items belonging to nearly every single missing student. Some of the belongings were intact, but others were arranged deliberately, like a message or a ritual. What happened on that bus wasn't an accident, and what the forest kept hidden for over 2 decades was more than a tragedy. It was a secret no one was meant to find. The halls of Forest Grove High School buzzed with the electric energy of seniors on the brink of freedom. Locker doors slammed, laughter echoed down corridors, and teachers wore the weary smiles of people counting down the days. It was May 1999, and for the class of '99, graduation was just around the corner. Among the sea of navy caps and gowns being prepped for the big day, 26 students stood out. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were close. A tight-knit group, grown together over the years through shared classrooms, heartbreaks, inside jokes, and Friday night games. Lacey Monroe walked the hall with effortless grace, a folder clutched to her chest. She was everything her parents hoped for: valedictorian, student council president, future Ivy Leaguer. Her father, Mayor Thomas Monroe, never missed a chance to mention her achievements during city speeches. But those who knew Lacey closely saw the pressure behind her polished smile. The late-night study sessions, the panic attacks hidden behind bathroom stalls. Not far behind, Jared Fields darted into the AV room, camera in hand, narrating his own mockumentary of high school life. Jared was the class clown, bold, relentless, occasionally obnoxious, but his eyes carried a sharpness few noticed. He planned to turn the camping trip into his final project, a time capsule of their last week together. Gonna be my Blair Witch, but funnier, he'd joke. Tyrese Hall towered over most of his classmates, shoulder pads long since replaced with the proud weight of a full-ride football scholarship to Oregon State. Everyone expected big things from Tyrese. Coaches, classmates, his mom, especially. But with every scholarship offer came a growing fear. What if he failed? What if the best years of his life were already behind him? Then there was Emily Tran, the girl whose presence was often marked only by the soft scrape of pencil on paper. Her sketchbook never left her side, filled with portraits of classmates who never knew they'd been drawn in forest scenes she claimed came to her in dreams. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when she did, it lingered. Emily wasn't exactly part of the group, but somehow they all trusted her. As the final bell rang on a Friday afternoon, the school was alive with celebration. Someone blasted Green Day's Good Riddance from their car stereo. Teachers handed out final permission slips, and talk of the upcoming trip to the Rogue River wilderness dominated every conversation. June 5th, 1999. It was supposed to be a celebration. 27 seniors from Forest Grove High School had been planning their graduation trip for months. After finals, college acceptance letters, and years of small-town monotony, this trip was their moment of freedom. The destination, a remote campground nestled deep within Oregon's rogue River-Siskiyou National Forest. Isolated, scenic, and far away from parents, curfews, and rules. They left that Saturday morning in a yellow school bus driven by Mr. Harold Griggs, a substitute driver filling in for the usual one, who had called out sick the night before. Departure was cheerful. Students waved to their families, backpacks stuffed with snacks and sleeping bags. A few parents captured grainy camcorder footage, laughter, cheers, and a group photo just before boarding. That was the last anyone would ever see of them. That evening, one of the parents, Mrs. Elsie McClure, received a voicemail at 6:41 p.m. It was from her daughter, Rachel. In the background, muffled laughter, someone yelling, "Turn that off." Then a pause. And silence. No goodbye. No hang-up. Just static. When the bus failed to check in at the campground that night, it was first assumed they'd gotten delayed. The weather had turned foggy. Roads in the forest were narrow, barely paved, and lined with sheer drop-offs. Parents called, but no one answered. By Sunday morning, panic set in. Search and rescue teams were dispatched. Helicopters scanned the region. Dogs tracked dead ends. But there were no tire tracks, no cell phone pings, and no broken branches to follow. The campground host confirmed no yellow school bus had arrived. The bus and its passengers had simply vanished. On the third day, search teams widened their perimeter. 1 week later, a local fisherman found something strange near a river bend 15 miles from the main road, a disposable camera lying half buried in the mud. The casing was cracked and water damaged. When investigators opened it, they found it empty. The film inside had been removed. 10 days after that, another mystery surfaced. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, whose son Trevor was among the missing, received a letter in the mail. No return address. No postmark. Just 5 words, written in shaky handwriting. "We made it. Please stop looking." At first, the note gave them hope. But handwriting experts reviewed it. The curves of the letters were off. The pressure is inconsistent. It looked almost like Trevor's writing, but not quite. The final verdict, likely forged. Possibly traced. Still, the note sparked rumors. Some said the kids had staged their disappearance. Others whispered about cults or strange rituals in the woods. Some believed the students were still alive, hiding. But the facts remained the same. There was no trace of the bus, the driver, or the 27 students. No witness ever came forward. Nobody was ever found. And after 2 months, the case was quietly closed, labeled an unsolved missing persons event. But the parents never stopped looking. Some walked the forest trails every year. Others posted photos on missing persons boards. And one father, Robert Vasquez, kept a journal, documenting every theory, every strange tip, every sleepless night. He once wrote, "I don't think they drove off the road. I don't think it was an accident. I think something took them. Something that didn't want them found." He never explained what he meant, and no one ever proved him wrong. 21 years had passed. The halls of Forest Grove High School echoed with the sounds of new students, new laughter, and new memories. But a shadow lingered. A plaque near the entrance bore the names of 27 students, etched in bronze beneath the words, "Gone but never forgotten, class of 1999. The school held a memorial every June. Teachers would light 27 candles. Some had retired early, unable to bear the weight of unanswered questions. Others stayed, haunted by the faces they once taught, faces that remained forever young in their minds. Across town, time hadn't moved much faster. Bedrooms once filled with teenage posters, textbooks, and cologne-scented air remained untouched. Beds were made the same way. Trophies, prom dresses, and half-written journals waited on shelves, as if their owners had simply stepped out and might return any minute. Some parents clung to hope like oxygen. Others sank into quiet grief, the kind that didn't scream. It just settled. Mr. Delaney, whose son Matthew was class valedictorian, Spent most days at the local library, rereading his son's final essay over and over. Mrs. Santos, whose daughter Nina played varsity soccer, watered the same garden Nina planted weeks before the trip. She never touched a petal. But no one held on tighter than Lacey's mother, Irene. While others buried their hope with the passing years, Irene sharpened hers into resolve. She refused to mark a grave, refused to sign any legal declaration of death. She kept Lacey's toothbrush in the holder, her voicemail greeting intact, and her bed freshly made every morning. "She's not gone," Irene would say. "I don't know where she is, but she's out there. I feel it." Neighbors called it denial. Her family called it grief. June 3rd, 2021. Nearly noon. A hiker named Travis Milner, an off-duty firefighter from Medford, Oregon, decides to explore a trail system that is rarely used deep inside the rogue River-Siskiyou National Forest. He's not looking for anything in particular, just solitude and silence. But a few hours in, after bushwhacking through thick undergrowth far beyond the marked paths, he sees something strange, a flash of yellow, almost entirely buried in brush and decay. As he clears back the ferns and dead vines, the shape begins to form. Metal, windows, cracked rubber tires sunk deep into the earth. It's a school bus. Rusted, broken, its frame twisted and smothered by years of growth. The number on the side is faint, nearly gone, but just barely readable. Number 57. The door is jammed, swollen from weather and time. He forces it open, coughing as stale air pours out. The interior is a tomb. Dust and mildew cling to every surface. Seats are ripped. Ivy grows through shattered windows. And on the floor, rotting but still recognizable, lie school bags, Letterman jackets, and a pair of moldy graduation caps. A jacket with the Forest Grove High School crest hangs limply on the edge of a seat. At the back, lying beneath collapsed luggage racks and debris, he spots the bones. Not one set, but several. Some are fully skeletonized, others partially decayed. It takes him a moment to understand what he's seeing. There are multiple sets of human remains. 17, later confirmed. He calls 911 immediately. Within hours, the site is cordoned off by law enforcement. Investigators, forensic teams, and anthropologists swarm the scene. And just like that, the mystery that had gone cold in 1999 is suddenly burning again. The media descends. Families who had spent 22 years grieving, or hoping, are forced to relive it all over again. The investigators begin cataloging the contents of the bus. Most items are weather damaged, some destroyed beyond recognition. But in a cracked, mold-covered backpack shoved under the driver's seat, they find something unusual, a manila folder, waterlogged but still intact. Inside are hand-drawn sketches, charcoal and pencil, signed in the bottom corners by Emily Thompson, one of the missing seniors. Her body is not among the remains. The sketches are haunting, disturbing. One shows a ring of figures standing in a forest clearing, surrounding a fire. Another shows faces hidden behind crudely drawn masks, blank, expressionless. Another sketch, darker and more frenzied, depicts blood dripping from tree branches, forming a circle on the forest floor. Symbols are scrawled in the background, none matching any known language. Some pages appear torn or ripped from a journal. The last sketch in the folder shows what looks like the school bus, but different. It's surrounded by tall, faceless silhouettes. And in the front window, behind the wheel, is a mask. Investigators identify the remains using dental records and DNA. Of the 28 people who disappeared, 26 students and 2 teachers, 17 bodies are accounted for. But 9 students are still missing. So are both teachers, including Mr. Carl Muse, the AP history teacher, and Ms. Janine Crawford, the chaperone. The discovery shatters any remaining theories that the class simply ran away or died in a crash. The bus is too deep in the forest, with no path wide enough for a vehicle of that size to reach without a trace. No roads nearby. No tire marks. It didn't crash there. It was placed there. Hidden. Why only 17? Where are the others? And why was Emily, a quiet student who barely spoke in class, drawing scenes that looked like rituals? Investigators combed the area within a half-mile radius, but the dense terrain slows the search. No footprints, no remains outside, only silence, and the weight of something they can't quite explain. The case is reopened, not just as a recovery, but as a possible crime scene. Foul play is suspected, and as the sketches are leaked to the press, a new theory begins to circulate. One far darker than anyone had considered before. What really happened to the class of '99 in those woods? And who, if anyone, planned for them never to return? Days after the discovery of the school bus in the Oregon woods, the police station in Bend was flooded with news vans, investigators, and concerned citizens. The entire state was buzzing with the mystery. What had happened to the class of 1999? What was the meaning behind the bones found inside the rusted school bus? And why, after more than 2 decades, had nothing surfaced until now? Then, on the morning of June 10th, an unassuming figure walked into the Bend police station. The early morning haze lingered in the air, and the fluorescent lights of the station hummed with the usual monotony until the door swung open, and a man stepped inside. He was gaunt, thin to the point of appearing almost fragile. His face was unshaven, his clothes ragged, a tattered jacket hanging loosely from his skeletal frame. His long, disheveled hair clung to his face as if he hadn't combed it in years, and his eyes, sunken with exhaustion, darted nervously around the room. The officers, who had been caught up in their own discussion about the bus discovery, fell silent when they saw him. The man didn't seem to notice the sudden shift in the air. He approached the front desk slowly, almost methodically, before leaning forward, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I'm Jared Fields, from a class of 1999. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air, charged with the weight of 22 years of unanswered questions. The officers exchanged confused glances, as if waiting for a punchline, but none came. This couldn't be real, could it? The last time anyone had heard Jared Fields' name was when he, along with the rest of the senior class, had vanished during their graduation trip. No body had ever been found. No trace. One of the officers, Sergeant Emily Wells, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Fields, can we get your identification?" Jared didn't respond. Instead, his eyes flicked nervously around the room, like someone who was constantly looking over his shoulder. "I was never supposed to come back," he mumbled, his voice trembling. "They're still watching." A chill ran down Sergeant Wells' spine. "Who's watching, Mr. Fields?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Jared shook his head, as though trying to shake off the thoughts that clung to him like a heavy fog. I don't know. I was never supposed to come back. None of us were." He sounded less like a man who had simply survived something tragic, and more like someone who had been forced to survive, like someone who had been marked by something dark and unnatural. Sergeant Wells' patience began to wear thin. She needed answers. They all needed answers. "Mr. Fields, we need you to tell us where you've been all these years. We need to know what happened to your friends, to the other students." Jared's eyes flickered nervously. He glanced toward the door, as if he feared someone might be listening. "I can't. Not yet. Not until He stopped, swallowing hard, as though the words themselves were poison in his throat. But before anyone could press further, a forensic technician entered the room with a report. The officer handed it over to Sergeant Wells. She read it quickly, her brow furrowing in disbelief. "Jared Fields, your fingerprints match. Your DNA, it's a match." For the first time since entering the station, Jared looked up, his eyes wide, like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. "I told you," he whispered. "I told you I was never supposed to come back. I shouldn't have come back." The officers watched him in stunned silence, trying to make sense of his words. They had been expecting a man who would explain the mystery, who would give them answers. Answers to the vanishing, to the school bus, to the bones. But instead, they had a man who seemed more like a puzzle, a man whose presence only deepened the mystery. "Mr. Fields, what do you mean by you shouldn't have come back?" Sergeant Wells pressed, her voice calm but insistent. Where were you for all these years? Where did you go? What happened to your classmates? Jared's face twisted in terror. He stepped back from the desk, as though trying to distance himself from the question, from everything. I can't say. Not yet. They're still out there. They won't stop watching until it's all over. A cold, unnerving silence filled the room. The officers glanced at each other, unsure of how to proceed. The man they had hoped would offer them closure, would tell them the truth, was now trembling with fear. And then, just as quickly as he'd arrived, Jared Fields turned and walked toward the door. I can't stay here, he said. They'll find me if I stay here. Sergeant Wells rushed to stop him. Mr. Fields, please, you have to. But before she could finish, he was gone. The door slammed behind him, and the officers were left with only more questions than before. They now had a living witness, Jared Fields, the only one who could explain what happened to the class of 1999. But whatever had happened to Jared, whatever had happened to the others, was far from over. The nightmare wasn't finished. It had only just begun. A few days later, Jared is sitting across from the investigators, his eyes wide with terror, a haunted look that hadn't faded in years. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The last 2 hours had been spent in painstaking detail, going over his timeline, his memories, his recollections of the last time he'd seen his classmates. But now, at this pivotal moment, he was now about to tell them everything. They were all dead, you know, he began, his voice shaky but resolute. The ones who didn't, the ones who resisted, they were never seen again, never heard from, just gone. Jared paused, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on his pants. He had been sitting in front of investigators for hours now, but the weight of his confession had never been so real, so suffocating. His words had already started to unravel the decades-old mystery. But this was the moment when the truth would finally emerge. It started the day the bus broke down, he continued. We were miles from the nearest road, deep in the forest. The engine sputtered and died. We couldn't move the bus. We couldn't get it started. So we waited and waited. Jared's voice quivered as he relived the memory, the dissonant sounds of the forest creeping back into his mind. That's when they found us. He leaned forward, his gaze locking with the investigators. They wore these robes, gray, like they'd been living in the dirt. I think they called themselves the Chosen. They said they were from an off-grid sanctuary, a place of peace, a place to escape the outside world. They told us the world was falling apart, that society as we knew it was crumbling. Jared shook his head, his eyes drifting to the floor. It sounded like a joke, but we were stuck. No one had signal on their phones, and none of us had any idea how to fix the bus. So we followed them. We didn't have a choice. The investigators exchanged glances, their faces impassive but keenly focused. Jared was speaking now with more urgency, his voice rising as the story poured out. At first, the commune was peaceful. It felt almost too good to be true. They gave us food and told us we could rest. They promised us everything we needed. They took care of us and gave us shelter. The air felt different there, like it had weight, like everything was slow. But after a while, things started to shift. Jared paused again, his breath catching in his throat. They started talking about reconditioning, how we needed to let go of our old lives, our pasts. We weren't allowed to talk about where we came from, what we were running from. They told us we had to forget everything. They called it cleansing. The word hung in the air like a warning. Jared's eyes flickered with something akin to fear, something darker than mere recollection. They gave us food, he continued, but it didn't taste right. It was off, like they were drugging us, dulling us. Some of us started getting these vivid dreams, nightmares that felt too real, too intense. And then they started making us sleep in shifts, very controlled, very specific. They wanted to know when we were awake and when we were asleep. It didn't matter if you were tired. You had to follow the schedule. He rubbed his eyes, clearly exhausted by the memory. Some of the kids started to resist. They couldn't take it. They wanted to leave, but they were too afraid. They were terrified of what would happen if they didn't comply. I saw a few of them try to escape. I heard their screams when they were when they were dragged into the woods. They were never seen again. The room was deathly quiet, the words hanging in the air like a sinister fog. Jared's lips trembled as he spoke again, his voice growing quieter. They told us they were the chosen ones. The world had ended outside those woods. The only thing left was their commune. They said we were chosen to live in a new world, to be a part of something greater. But it wasn't a choice. It was a prison. And those who didn't accept it, he swallowed hard, his throat dry. They were sacrificed. Jared's eyes flickered with a cold, distant fear. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Those who tried to leave, the ones who fought back, they were offered up to the forest. No one ever came back. The investigators sat motionless, taking in every word as Jared continued. By 2006, I'd had enough. I found a way to escape. I ran as far and as fast as I could. But even then, I was too afraid to tell anyone. I kept quiet. I stayed hidden. I thought, just maybe if I kept quiet, they'd forget about me. That I could live my life. Jared's gaze darkened, his voice lowering to a whisper. I thought I was the only one. But when I heard the bus had been found, I knew. I knew they hadn't forgotten. I had to tell someone. I had to tell you all the truth. The room fell into silence once more, the weight of Jared's words pressing down on everyone present. The investigators were stunned. What he had just described wasn't just a simple disappearance. It was a conspiracy, a cult, and it had taken 27 young lives, lives that had been reconditioned, controlled, and sacrificed to something darker than anyone had ever imagined. Jared had escaped, but his classmates were never meant to. They had been chosen for a purpose. And the forest, the very forest that had hidden their remains for decades, held the final, horrifying truth. The world they had been told about wasn't gone. It was waiting for the next generation to take their place. When Jared first came forward, the reaction was mixed. Some parents clung to his every word, hoping for answers, desperately needing closure. They believed him. His story made sense in a way that the authorities couldn't explain. But others, especially the families of the missing students, refused to believe him. They couldn't reconcile the image of their children with the grim picture Jared painted. To them, he was just a survivor, a man whose mind had been warped by the horrors he had endured. The divide in the community grew deeper. In the months following his return, some families openly accused Jared of being responsible for their children's deaths, while others saw him as a victim of the same tragedy. His credibility was questioned in every direction. The media had a field day, labeling him everything from a hero to a delusional maniac. But Jared never faltered in his resolve. He knew the truth, and it was more terrifying than anyone could imagine. Soon, Jared was placed in protective custody. The police couldn't risk him being silenced by those who still believed their children were out there, waiting to be found. They had no idea who could be trusted. There were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. The militia's role, the strange events in the forest, the missing students, none of it fit neatly into a single narrative. But Jared's story, disturbing as it was, offered a chilling glimpse into what had really happened. Months later, Jared published a memoir, recounting his experiences and his unsettling journey through the heart of that forest. The book became a sensation, sparking new theories about the class of '99, the militia, and the twisted events that had unfolded in the woods. Some people believed every word. Others dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken man. But one thing was certain. Jared had seen something beyond human comprehension, something that no one would ever be able to fully understand. The aftermath of the class of 1999's disappearance remained an open wound in the community. The forest still held its secrets, and the answers were buried deep beneath the moss and vines, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Jared's memoir became a symbol of both truth and madness, a final, haunting chapter in the story of the students who vanished without a trace. As for the families of the missing, they were left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. Some continued to search for their children, convinced that they were out there somewhere. Others, like the families who had always supported Jared, were left with only the grim knowledge that their loved ones had never truly come back. The forest had claimed them, and the truth was far darker than anyone had ever imagined. It had been months since Jared's memoir was published, and the frenzy over the class of '99 had not died down. The story still hung in the air like a shadow over the community, with families torn between hope and despair. Some were convinced Jared had fabricated everything, while others believed he had merely scratched the surface of something far darker. Jared had become a recluse, only emerging when necessary for interviews or to meet with authorities. But on a cool, overcast afternoon, he made his way back to Forest Grove High School, the place that had once been filled with laughter, the bright futures of the class of '99, and the promise of a summer filled with adventures. Now, it was a memorial, an empty reminder of what had been lost. He stood alone in front of the memorial dedicated to his classmates, the polished stone slabs engraved with the names of every student who had disappeared. The plaque gleamed in the muted light, a symbol of the void that had consumed the town. Jared knelt down, pulling something from his jacket, a faded, moldy yearbook. He opened it carefully, the pages yellowed with time. There at the back was a note that only he could have written. He placed it gently inside the yearbook, tucking it under the cover, where it wouldn't be found until someone looked closely. The note read, "We tried to leave. Only I made it. I'm sorry." For a long moment, Jared just stared at the memorial, the weight of his grief and guilt pressing down on him like the forest itself. He felt the memories of those lost, the faces of his friends, their laughter, and the horrific final days of their journey. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving behind only the yearbook and the haunting message for anyone brave enough to seek the truth. Some say Jared made it all up, created a story to explain the nightmares that had never left him. Others say the truth was even darker than he claimed, that what happened in the forest had been something far worse than anyone could imagine. But one thing is certain, what happened to the class of '99 still haunts the trees of Oregon. Drop a comment below and let us know. Do you believe Jared's story? Or is something even more disturbing still hidden in the woods? Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more unbelievable real-life mysteries.